Good evening, and welcome to the first ever virtual benefit for New Yorkers for Parks. I am honored to open this evening's program and to have been a member of the New Yorkers for Parks team since 2018. I started as the inaugural fellow for Great Parks in the Research and Policy Department. As the Leon Levy Fellow, I had the opportunity to work with the team to explore questions about parks, gardens, their uses, their care, and their funding. Seeing the impact of New Yorkers for Parks on New York City was a call to action for me, and I welcomed the chance to join the team. Now, as the newly hired project manager for advocacy and communications, I help to bring people together around our mission, work closely with our coalition partners, and make sure that our message is clear, that our work benefits all New Yorkers. It is now my pleasure to advance this evening's program by introducing the chair of the board, Paul Gotzigan. Paul, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jessica, for the introduction and your commitment to the mission of New Yorkers for Parks. It has been wonderful to see your growth from the beginning as a Leon Levy Fellow to your current role helping us develop and communicate this call to action around parks and open spaces. And thank you all again for joining us tonight. Tonight's conversation is entitled The Power of Parks, Pandemic, Recovery, and Beyond, and we are fortunate to have assembled an exceptional panel of thought leaders to share their ideas around how parks can be reimagined and transformed. But first, I want to say a few words about the history of New Yorkers for Parks within the context of New York, and why we believe its mission now is more relevant than ever. For over 100 years, New Yorkers for Parks' mission has been to elevate parks and open space citywide through advocacy, research, and community outreach. Unique among other citywide parks champions, New Yorkers for Parks is the only independent advocacy organization that advocates for parks and open space across the 5 boroughs and can therefore provide a neutral space to develop progressive ideas without conflict of interest. Founded in 1908, so yes, this is not our first pandemic, the organization has adjusted its priorities to be consistently responsive and relevant to current concerns. From operating the first experimental playgrounds, providing summer jobs for teens from low-income families, preserving natural areas and wetlands, promoting innovative design and fighting for funding and maintenance, to filing lawsuits, stopping park encroachments and alienation, correcting both governmental and private sector overreaches, and addressing the larger social issues raised by the interaction of people and their parks. And of course, most relevant today, our parks continue to provide one of the few safe places where all New Yorkers can escape their apartments during the current pandemic. While the organization has had a history of strong and effective leaders, Iphigene Ox-Sulzberger, August Heckscher, Emily Parks, Jerry Rosenberg, this year, New Yorkers for Parks was fortunate to welcome a new, dynamic executive director, Adam Ganzer, who you will hear from shortly. But before beginning our program, I wish to thank our accomplished panelists for generously giving of their time and valued perspectives. Our speakers, Dr. Mary Bassett, educator at Harvard and leader in public health, Eric Klinenberg, sociologist and scholar of urban studies at NYU, Jeanette Sadak Khan, Distinguished Authority on Transportation and Urban Transformation, and the moderator of tonight's panel, New York Times architecture critic Michael Kimmelman. So now on to their compelling conversation. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here. Let's begin talking really where we are at the moment. We have this incredible convergence of crises, an economic crisis, we have a racial reckoning, and of course we have COVID. Eric, maybe you can just give me a kind of picture of where you think the city is at this moment, and what you think the largest threats are to the city.
Well, unfortunately, it's one of those moments where it's hard to pick just a few. We're facing battles on a number of different fronts. We have a serious fiscal crisis to deal with. I'm very concerned about the capacity of public institutions to play the role we need them to, whether that's the subway system, which clearly has major needs at the moment, or parks. There's a lot for the city to work on, and I anticipate some work between the city and the new federal government in the coming months. And so I think the real issue is, how do we get through November, December, and January, when we're in the midst of a new spike in COVID cases with joblessness everywhere and real distress? And I think this is a profound challenge.
Well, as Erica said, the whole country is in the grip of a resurgence of COVID. Our situation is more or less the same, although there's some really good news on the possibility of a vaccine. We still have a novel virus to which people have not been previously exposed, and we have nothing except supportive treatment. So the health department is going to have to do the same thing that it's been doing. It needs to test. And it needs, people have to stop mixing. That's why we're seeing infection rates go up. In a city like New York, which is dense, which is why it's such an exciting and wonderful city, that's where parks are really an important part of giving people the opportunity to maintain physical distance and be outside.
It's been clear in New York City that we just don't have enough, I mean, when the pandemic hit, even, 843 acres in Central Park, like they were exploding. There just wasn't enough space. And that was true all over the city. There's just not enough space for people to go outside and breathe. And, when the cities closed playgrounds and ball fields, this had a real impact. 1 million New Yorkers lost access to public space, and many of those were in the neighborhoods that were hardest hit.
One of the things that really came out in the last several months is the extent to which you can't separate the overlapping crises that we're experiencing right now. And with so many millions of people home and alone and separated and just reflecting on the conditions in the United States, we've clearly seen that the crisis in racial justice and access to a good city and to decency from the public realm and from public institutions and public agencies, including the police. We're done with the old model. We're not going back to that. We can't. And so now the question is, how do we create a city that's not just social, but also more equal and democratic?
New York is not just a sort of unequal city. It is a very unequal city. Something like close to half the population lives at or near poverty, even though we all think of it, and it is one of the wealthiest cities in the world. And that's reflected in its very high levels of segregation, racial, ethnic segregation. So when we talk about these public amenities, they really are a democratizing space, which I would argue is also good for health. But the access to these sort of spaces aren't equal across the city. And that's, what's so tragic about budget cuts like this, because the people who can really get out there and advocate for their parks are, people who have resources. And the parks are equally needed in neighborhoods where they've been especially neglected. And I think sometimes reminding ourselves that these spaces are good for health as well as good for the economy, good for democracy is, something that adds another impetus to defend these spaces and to invest in them.
We have, I think at the moment, something like a 4.2, maybe it's gone up, $1 billion projected budget gap for the MTA. And there's a 14% budget cut in the city, I gather, to parks, which is relatively small compared to the MTA, but it has a huge outsized impact on people in, especially in underserved neighborhoods.
There is this opportunity to, change the way we have worked before. We can actually flip the script. And I think when you look at it, our overloaded parks and our empty streets provide a clean slate for rethinking the design of our cities. And without all the traffic, you see the entire city that's actually been trapped between the lanes, that's lost between the lanes. So I think you're seeing not only in New York City, but around the country and around the world, there's a new road order for cities. And, when I was transportation commissioner, opening up Broadway to pedestrians in Times Square was considered this radical act. And now cities around the world are turning to their streets. That's a first response. That's what they're doing in the recovery.
I really hope that the public, which turn to parks as part of daily sort of refurbishing their sense of well-being, that they'll understand how important it is to support these parks. That, in Upper Manhattan, that people were out in Inwood Park, at all hours of the day, apart from each other, skirting each other, but enjoying the benefit of being in the outdoors.
People are so hungry to be together, right? They can't wait for cities to reopen. And the issue won't be reopening cities. It's finding ways to come back together safely and interact and bring our economy back to life. And parks are an essential part of this equation. We should take this moment to make the changes that we need so that we're better positioned, the next time we need our parks.
I think of social infrastructure as the set of physical places that shape our capacity to interact with each other, which could be a playground. It could be, parks. It could be libraries, which I wrote a lot about in my book. It could be a commercial corridor that's successful. When we invest in them, when we design them well, when we build them well, when we maintain them, that's a really important thing. When we program them, we get all kinds of returns. And when we don't invest in social infrastructure, that's when we become much more likely to hunker down and isolate.
New York City's 1,700 parks are only, 0.5% of the city's budget, but they were targeted for 14% of the budget cuts. And I think this reflects this idea that parks are just nice to have, right? But they're not essential infrastructure like bridges or highways. But parks are not amenities. They are the mortar that holds cities together. And they're a critical reason that people come to and stay in cities.
As a kid in Chicago in the 1970s and 1980s, I was in some way a beneficiary of lots of investment into the public realm that came before me. But also as a kid who grew up in Chicago in the 70s and 80s, I was a victim of a city in a fiscal crisis and a government that refused to bail it out in a meaningful way. And what that meant is that nobody went to the playgrounds because there was broken glass and equipment that was falling apart, and the libraries were closed 3 or 4 days a week. And so one thing I observed just as a child is that it's not enough just to have a public place. You also have to continue to take care of it, which is why I think we need to really pay attention to the policy making we do in the short term to keep public spaces viable all over New York.
I think that really our vision of what's possible has changed. And now we're starting to see it. And people of all, walks of life and small businesses included are saying, we want more of this.
The lifeblood of the city during these past few months has been the ability to go out and the reclaiming of streets. 10,000 permits have been issued for restaurants, which have moved into the streets and changed the streetscape. To me, the message of the last few months has been very positive about New York. Economic issues aside and the challenges that are clearly ahead, I think New York has proven to have a kind of resilience which is based on the very social infrastructure that the city has developed over the course of a period of time.
If you think about our crown jewel parks, you look at Prospect Park and Central Park and Fresh Kills, Flushing Meadows, that's 6,000 acres, right? Yet this space is less than half of the space that's taken up by the 3 million parking spaces. So we're not really limited by space, we're really just limited by imagination.
Hi, I'm Adam Ganzer. I'm the Executive Director of New Yorkers for Parks, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this year's benefit. I want to specifically thank Paul Gotzigan, our board chair, and the entire board of directors, and all of those out here who have supported New Yorkers for Parks. I want to give a profound thank you to Commissioner Mitchell Silver and the entire Parks Department, and the many conservancies and friends of groups and volunteers. They have worked tirelessly through this pandemic the last several months, as we have all relied on our parks in record numbers. In many ways, our park system is a source of envy for cities around the country and around the world. We have over 1,700 parks spread out over 30,000 acres of land in New York City. That's over 12% of the entire city's area. 160 miles of our waterfront are managed by the Parks Department. We have iconic destinations, of course, like Central Park, Prospect Park, Van Cortlandt Park in the High Line. And we have hundreds of amazing neighborhood destinations like Poe Park, Brower Park, Rainey Park, and Hero Park, all centers for their communities, more so now than ever before. The Parks Department and the not-for-profit partners have been Herculean in their efforts to support New Yorkers. But the pandemic and the economic crisis has revealed, or really made more obvious, serious structural flaws in our park system, flaws that are generations in the making. Some of these stats you've heard before. Fully 1 million people in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx lost access to their neighborhood park and playground during the pandemic. This mostly in communities of color and communities hardest hit by COVID-19. On the environmental front, we have a quarter, 25% of the 30,000 acres of parks in the flood zone. Sandy was not that long ago, so we all understand the implications there. We have $6 billion, that's billion with a B, in deferred capital maintenance on critical parks infrastructure. Many of our parks are literally crumbling. This past year alone, we had a 14% budget cut for the Parks Department. That was more than all but one other agency. This during a pandemic when we are all relying on our parks more than ever before. Many of these issues feel insurmountable, but this is a unique moment. You may have noticed that this amazing panel does not include anyone directly in the parks world. That is because parks cannot be considered in isolation. They are economic drivers. They should be drivers of equity and affordability. They will make our city more connected, more resilient, more sustainable, and they are critical to our public health. We need to partner with these sectors. We can only do this through visionary thinking and broad coalitions that see our city, its infrastructure, its transportation, its public health and affordability, and its parks as one single connected whole. It is time for system change in our public funding and park building. This really is a call to action. We are facing daunting challenges, but this is the time to make lasting change. I, for one, could not be more optimistic about New York City's future and the role our park system will play in the recovery and well beyond. I hope you'll join me. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. The generosity of our donors and partners is the foundation of New Yorkers for Parks. Their contributions at every level make our work possible. We're grateful for their support and to our dedicated board of directors, who are strong stewards of these investments to ensure maximum impact and benefit for all New Yorkers who are relying on our parks and open spaces. Partnerships are essential. They can make what appears to be impossible, possible. And we see this reflected in the work of our honoree tonight, Alan Steele, and the Jacob K. Javits Convention Center team. Before Betsy Smith kicks off our tribute to Alan and his team, some special friends wanted to share their congratulations. Let's take a look.
In late 2011, we started our search for a new president and CEO. We gave our search firm very clear instructions. We wanted a world-class convention center athlete, and that's exactly who they found, Alan Steele.
Alan shares the spirit of New Yorkers for Parks in many, many different ways. First of all, he cares so much about sustainability. He is so passionate about the work that he does.
He's a person of great integrity, honesty, principle, and vision.
He has many, many talents, and he does everything well.
The way he's gone about creating partnerships with the High Line and Hudson Yards and the other neighbors in the area and demonstrating what can be done with green roofs and green infrastructure. And he's the envy of everyone else.
A lot of it has to do just with his sheer attitude of ease, of highly, highly technical, highly stressful scenarios, and his absolute knowledge of every intricate piece and part.
He's clearly an inspiration to his team, and he's really the kind of person that brings out the best in people.
And the Javits Center now is an international model among convention centers for sustainability and community engagement.
Thinking big, imagining what the best, most environmentally embracing building would look like, and then building it. It's just genius.
You know, if you think about the challenges over the last several years, Alan maintained his good humor, his ability to think on his feet, his ability to come up with new ideas and to follow through. And in all of those endeavors, he was a great partner.
Alan is a true force for good. His vision and his commitment are second to none.
Alan, from me personally and my entire team from the federal government, we'd like to congratulate you on this award.
Congratulations on this well-deserved honor from New Yorkers for Parks.
Alan, you are a treasure for New York, a treasure for the birds, and a treasure to everyone who lives here.
My name is Betsy Smith, and I am delighted to be part of the team celebrating Alan tonight. The Jacob K. Javits Convention Center transformed itself into a top-flight medical station during a pandemic. This was a bold idea that needed a revolutionary leader and talented individuals to realize. Alan and the men and women of the Javits Center were just such a team to make that happen, as we saw earlier this year. As stewards of an iconic New York City resource, Alan and his team took seriously their role to contribute to the space in a powerful way. This culture of collaboration began when Alan took the helm and is reflected in how the Javits Center has worked tirelessly with the community and the community boards to make Javits a part of that neighborhood. His visionary commitment to sustainability is reflected in its very unconventional green roof, a sanctuary for birds and wildlife, as well as a way to conserve energy. The work we saw this year from the Javits team resonates with New Yorkers for Parks, which tirelessly advocates for thoughtful planning, equitable access, and use of open space to benefit all New Yorkers. I know Alan well as a dedicated Parker in the New Yorkers for Parks mission, having served together on its board. His talent, his integrity and leadership, and his generosity have helped New Yorkers for Parks in countless ways. I welcome this opportunity to join in honoring Alan and his tremendous team. They reflect the best of New York and are great recipients of the 2020 New Yorkers for Parks Leadership Award. I invite you to take a brief look at the Javits Convention Center today and then hear from Alan himself.
For more than 3 decades, the Javits Center has been supporting New Yorkers by hosting large-scale events that generate billions of dollars in economic activity, by creating a model of sustainability that has conserved energy and advanced local wildlife, and rising to unprecedented challenges when our city, state, and country need us the most.
The employees here have really shown how incredibly dynamic they are in terms of their skill set and how they went from operating a traditional convention center and then being able to convert that skill set into operating a hospital. They're just an inspiring group of people and really were able to stand up to the challenge.
In the days after 9/11, this New York icon served as a staging area for first responders. Following the devastation of Hurricane Maria, we served as the city's main collection point for donations. And during the COVID-19 outbreak, our staff constructed a temporary hospital to reduce the burden on local hospitals.
The Javits Center has been here and continues to be here through good times and bad times. We generate a tremendous amount of economic activity, and in times of crisis, the city and the state leans on the Javits Center to provide resources and services in a way that really no other venue can.
Today, we're working to resurrect the events industry and support the Empire State economy once again. We constructed a state-of-the-art broadcast studio that can host virtual and hybrid events. Equipped with the latest technology, we formed an on-site production team that can provide a turnkey experience for any organization.
I'm very excited because, when we have the expansion, it's going to be a facility for all reasons and all seasons. We're going to have something for everyone.
When this is over, we will meet again. We will travel. We will celebrate. We will share ideas that move our world forward. And together, we will explore our expansion with more than 1 million square feet of new space to accommodate the needs of today's environment. We're building a one-of-a-kind rooftop pavilion, a 1-acre rooftop farm, and the largest special event space in New York City.
Human nature has the aspiration, has the desire to come back for one-on-one, for in-person meetings. So I think that's going to return. I'm sure the industry will pick up and will definitely come back to a full house once again.
So wear a mask, support local businesses, rediscover your city. But don't give up on New York. We haven't.
Hi, I'm Alan Steele, and I want to thank everyone at New Yorkers for Parks, the board members and the staff, for this great recognition. This has been an unprecedented year for Javits. Who would have thought, as we started the year with our normal trade show calendar, that by the time we got to March, we would have over 20 federal, state, city agencies here building a medical station, which became a model for other convention centers around the country. We built 4,000 beds in a matter of days, and over the period of occupation as a hospital, we treated over 1,100 patients. None of this would have been possible without many different organizations, but the executive team and the leadership they showed during that period is something that certainly is worth remarking on. Because while everyone else sheltered in place as they were told to do, this group came to work every day. These are not police or National Guard or medical professionals, they're citizens who rose to the challenge that COVID offered to us. People like Ken Dixon, our Director of Security, who was the on-site liaison with all of the federal and state agencies. Chris McMahon, our HR Director, who coordinated the labor who built the hospital, and with our other employees who were working from home. Mike Rubery, who worked with events logistics, and the United States Army Corps of Engineers and their logistics plans. Mariam Karim, who led our catering team, which fed and watered everyone who was here, including the patients. The IT provisions were led ably by Mark Sims and Tim Gabarungi, because as you can imagine, today everyone needs a lot of IT to stay in touch with each other, and we had a lot of people who needed that. Brad Siciliano, who got COVID himself and had to work from home, but did so continually as he liaised with the state and made sure that we were in good shape with all of our leadership. Tony Sclafani, who every day communicated with our staff to make sure they knew where we were, and has done so ever since. Melanie McManus, who managed our finances and made sure we could afford to do everything we were being asked to do, and Sonia Lowe, who dealt with the legal and insurance issues that cancellations and new events created. Ken Sanchez, during this whole period, continued to work in the existing building, making sure that we were able to operate as was required, but he also continued to work on the expansion, which will be opening next year. And Dorian Guerin, who worked with all of our customers to cancel their events, to reschedule their events, to rebook their events, and to make sure that they had what they needed as we looked to the future. And now we are looking to the future. We're looking to the future, which includes hybrid events which will have both a physical presence and a virtual presence. And we've just built the largest broadcast studio in New York City to do that. We're in the process of adding a new solar roof to our existing green roof, and we're in the middle of finishing our 1.2 million square foot expansion, which will be open for us in spring of 2021. And I'm particularly pleased that that has an outdoor space for up to 1,500 people, and a farm which we'll be able to grow vegetables and use in our kitchens when we resume normal business again. It's important that we all evolve as we move through this kind of environment. 4 years ago, I was here along with the rest of the team for an election night party. So I'm happy to be standing here 4 years later with our reputation enhanced by what we've done. I'm proud of our accomplishments, and I'm honored to work alongside each of these leaders. We do not know what the future will hold, but I do know that the Javits team is ready to face with it and deal with it. So on behalf of this entire team, I want to thank you again for this honor and wish you good night.
Alan, thank you for your partnership with New Yorkers for Parks. My fellow board members, join me in congratulating you. On behalf of all New Yorkers, we thank you and your team for redefining how public space can address our most critical needs during a public health emergency. We wish you all ongoing success. The power of partnership and collaboration is at the core of New Yorkers for Parks, to enable it to fulfill its mission and the bold agenda Adam shared earlier. New Yorkers for Parks needs you to join in our work to provide your time, talents, and treasure so we can ensure that a robust, sustainable, resilient, and equitable parks and open space plan comes to fruition throughout our city and for all its people. Thank you for standing with us at this pivotal time and in the future as we work together to reimagine the future of New York's parks and open space. We need you to be engaged, to champion the priority of parks across our city, to stand for equity and access for all, and to support our advocacy efforts with your generous donations. Executive Director Adam Ganzer will be a dedicated steward of your investment, yielding strong returns to this great city, and will be working along with a smart and dedicated, passionate team, some of whom you have seen tonight. Together, they are indeed a potent force. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to Emily Walker, Director of Outreach and Programs, who will lead us into part 2 of our great conversation.
Thank you, Paul, for the introduction and for all that you do to lead New Yorkers for Parks. Your passion for parks is an inspiration for all of us. It goes without saying that it has been quite a year. And while the challenges are significant, as our distinguished speakers noted earlier, New York City's parks and the people who support them are at the heart of every community and borough. For those of you just getting to know us this evening, New Yorkers for Parks is the city's only independent advocate for parks and open spaces. We use research, data, and partnerships to advocate for the resources and policies that NYC Parks needs to ensure that every community has access to clean, safe, and beautiful parks. One critical part of our work is to advocate every year for an increased budget for NYC Parks. And I am incredibly fortunate to work with the ever-expanding coalition of partners that are committed to advocating for parks, gardens, and open spaces. Our Play Fair coalition of open space stewards, supporters, volunteers, and advocates includes 300 organizations and the thousands of people behind them from across the 5 boroughs. These New Yorkers work tirelessly to improve their local parks, while also making their voices heard to the highest levels of city government. Simply put, these New Yorkers make our parks and gardens thrive, even in the most challenging times. Their work is truly essential to our collective success. Our panelists tonight have discussed the impact we have seen in this unprecedented time of crisis. We hope you enjoy this next portion of the panel discussion from these dynamic leaders. I am sure we will all be inspired to action. Thank you.
Let us turn then to, what's to come. Janelle, let me turn to you and ask, what would you do in the coming months to set priorities that would be mindful of the kind of things we're talking about in terms of public space and serving the city of New York in particular?
I think that there is, there's that line, there's no Democratic or Republican way to pick up the garbage, and infrastructure has that attribute as well. And so I think that infrastructure is going to be one of the first things that gets moved in the new Congress, because there's strong support by both Republicans and Democrats for this. Not only the importance of repairing our deteriorating infrastructure, but the job creation side of it as well. Cities absolutely need to be more equitable, where your access to opportunities in open space is not determined, by your address or your zip code. And so we can do this. Mayor Bloomberg's long-range sustainability plan was about giving all New Yorkers, access to public space within a 10-minute walk or ride. That's critical, right? That's a very different operating code for the way we set up our cities. And what we found at the end of the day, we built 60 plazas in all neighborhoods across the city. And we found that creating space for people makes cities safer, and it makes streets more inviting, and it's better for business, and it's better for health.
I think we're hearing about the idea of public space as something that is much broader than, a place to sort of get your outdoor gym and workout. To just give you an example, childhood injuries, kids being hit by cars in the street, was something that Harlem Hospital saw a lot of in the 80s when I trained there. And it turned out that the kids didn't have any place to play. The parks were derelict. They were strewn with broken glass. So the pediatrics surgeons really made an all-out effort to get those playgrounds back in order as a health intervention.
Yeah, Eric, you have done research on this in different ways. Maybe you could speak to this as well. I remember some, forgive me if I'm not getting it right, but some research you were citing in, I think it was Philadelphia, about the transformation of abandoned lots and what kind of impact that had on the communities.
You know, Philadelphia, like a lot of post-industrial cities, lost a lot of population and has tens of thousands of empty lots and abandoned buildings in the landscape. And in poor neighborhoods, these places are really sources, you know, not just of blight, but also of kind of violence and disorder. If you've got an abandoned place and an empty lot, it's hard to control what happens there, and bad things tend to happen. People feel that in their bones. And when I had done research on a heat wave in Chicago, for instance, I found that the most dangerous places in the city were not just the poor places and the segregated places, but the places that were really kind of physically depleted, you know, that didn't have social infrastructure working very well. Well, this team in Pennsylvania said, we're going to randomly select a set of blocks where we will inexpensively fix up the empty lots and board up the abandoned buildings, turn the empty lots into little pocket parks. And then we'll leave the adjacent blocks as is, and we'll just compare what happens. And what they found over more than a decade of research now is that when you make minor investments in fixing up blighted urban areas, you significantly decrease levels of violent crime and levels of gun crime. And what's more, they hooked people who live in the neighborhood up to heart rate monitors and had them walk around the neighborhood just as they ordinarily would. And even people who were there all the time experienced this thing where when you walk by a blighted space, your heart rate jumps. You feel stressed, right? And when you walk by a place that was abandoned or empty and has now been converted into a park, your heart rate stays steady. It gets us to this question about what we can do coming out of this opportunity from COVID, right? We're in a horrible crisis at the moment, and it's hard to think about anything that's much greater than survival right now. But pretty soon, we're going to have to face big questions about how to rebuild and what kind of cities we want to make and where our resources were going to go. And so, you know, I really hope that we have leadership that's bold enough to push us in a new direction.
Yeah, Mary, you worked in the city administration as well.
Yes.
So let me ask you what this administration should do. And beyond that, what should be a priority for those running for office in terms of, reimagining public space in the city?
Well, I think that I've been as clear as I can that whoever wants to take on the leadership of the city has to address these issues, the issues of homelessness, housing affordability, access to health care, the issues of access to public amenities like parks and sidewalks, public safety. All of these have been threatened in the current period. So they're going to have to figure out how to navigate the resources to make a more equal city. That's not going to be easy, but it has been done. The New Deal was a real realignment of social investments, and that's what we need now.
When you list so many things that need to be done, Mary, I think you're both pointing out the sort of integrated nature of all the things we're talking about, and also creating a kind of daunting laundry list of costs and challenges that I think can make people freak out. You and I have talked about the sort of cost efficiency of investments in things like public transportation. What would be your economic argument for investment in improving public spaces?
Well, we've already seen that it works. I mean, we did that under the Bloomberg administration, and by any metric, whether it's taking a look at the economic benefits to residents and to small businesses, the health impacts. It is exciting to see that the first line of pandemic response to cities around the world is reclaiming their streets for walking and biking and active transportation. I think what's also incredible to see is that cities are looking at almost setting up like a 15-minute neighborhood, right? Like looking at how they set up their cities. So a 15-minute city, which has been talked about, is where you can access all of your activities, within a 15-minute, walk or bike ride. And so looking at resetting our cities a little differently so that you can easily get around, that obviously makes it healthier to reach all places with active transportation. It's better for the local economy if you can shop with local merchants rather than at national, chains. It's better access for older people, and it's better for equity or opportunity where you can actually access jobs and services. An essential part of this is parks, which need to be in every neighborhood. And this is going to create more equitable communities. This is going to create healthier communities, happier communities, more resilient communities. And, we can do this. It's not that we don't have the raw materials or the resources. It's just a vision to see what's possible that's needed.
I grew up in Upper Manhattan, which has Fort Tryon Park and Inwood Park. And the walls, the stone walls throughout those parks were built during the in the aftermath of the Depression, during the New Deal. So they are an example of the kind of civic infrastructure building projects that can be possible when a government decides that it needs to both rebuild public life and provide jobs. Now when we know that not only our incomes, but our real economy, our lives themselves depend on building it back better, as they say, I just think that there'll be more support for it.
Has there ever been a moment that has proved the value of parks more clearly to public health and to mental health and to just the functioning of the city? So it would seem like the best moment to make an argument that investing in parks pays a dividend far higher than many other investments that we have been making.
I think we need a kind of a social infrastructure era where, coming out of COVID, we need to think about how we reorganize our cities and communities for a social life that can be healthy and sustainable. To walk around New York City these last several months has been to live in a different place that's not altogether worse. There have been extraordinary things about being in New York City. Although we have to wear masks, although we have to keep distant from one another, we've found a way to reconstitute our public life.
Going outside after the election in Central Park and Prospect Park, all the parks, the joy, everybody out there, the waves of joy, people spontaneously just celebrating and yelling and clapping and smiling, and everybody out there in the public realm together safely, but celebrating. And it speaks to what you were talking about, Eric, that hunger for public space and being together. And this is the moment to expand that opportunity.
I think there has never been so much appetite to return to public life and to make it better. When we hit the post-pandemic moment, and it will come, at some point it will come, I think there will be a greater appetite for collective life than we have ever seen. And so this is our moment. And if you have had the pleasure and the security and the privilege of being close to a great outdoor space like our great park these last few months, think about what a service it would be for you to advocate for other people who haven't had that.
So Mary and Jeanette and Eric, thank you so much. It was fun and fascinating to talk to you, and I'm grateful. And I hope everyone who's listening to this takes you up on all of your ideas.
Thank you again to our wonderful panelists for sharing their thoughts on the power of parks, pandemic, recovery, and beyond. And thank you all so much for joining us here this evening. Please visit us at our website, NY4P.org, to donate or help us and our coalition work for a better New York. I grew up in Wisconsin, but have lived in New York for over 20 years, and frankly, I'm still waiting for winter to come. We all should be outside, so bundle up, get outdoors, and enjoy the rest of the year. Have a great evening.